Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Ana Principi, and I'm the Undersecretary of Institutional Relations and International Cooperation at the School of Humanities and Educational Sciences at the National University of La Plata. I would like to welcome you all to this, the fourth cycle of conferences we are holding as part of this new joint project between the USA and Argentina. Share dialogues on gender, ethnicity, geopolitics, history, and memory. The project is one of the beneficiaries of the U.S. Embassy in Argentina's grant program for cooperation and exchange project. The University of La Plata is extremely grateful to the Embassy for choosing and sponsoring this series of conferences. I particularly like to thank the cultural assistant of the U.S. Embassy in Argentina, Dr. Michael McLean, and the specialists Nori Cerdá and Giselle Dubinsky for all their support and hard work during the preparation process. I would like to thank as well Professor Graciela Baum, Professor Veronica March, and Professor Carolina Marino for all their hard work too, and during the preparation process, and Fernando Rigone and Ignacio Angelani as well. At these events, 22 professors from the USA and Argentina have discussed and will discuss and call into questions the connections, intersections, and point of contact between concepts such as ethnicity, class, feminism, testimonial literature, translation, decolonial turn and language teaching, geopolitics, history, and memory. This speaks of academic bonds, both previous and reinforced by the project. Academic bonds and dialogue. This is in part the richness of these seminars. But apart from these bonds between scholars and institutions, I have no doubts that the lectures will also encourage the audience to ask questions and engage in new discussions. And now Carolina and Veronica will introduce Graciela Baum. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. So first, we will introduce today's speaker, Graciela Baum, and then she will give her talk. Meanwhile, the audience can write any questions on the YouTube chat, and at the end, there will be some time to read those questions for Graciela to clarify or enlarge any concepts.
Okay, Graciela is a professor in English language and literature, graduated from Humanities and Education Science School, University of La Plata. She has specialized in constructivism and education, graduated from Latin American Social Science School, and she's also a candidate for master's degree in linguistics at the same university. Her thesis is about English teaching, teaching materials, and decoloniality, and it is at final stage. She's a categorized researcher in the area of English and decoloniality.
She's also head of the areas of Introduction to the English Language and Special Didactics and Teaching Practices in English Language 2, and part of the staff of English Language 2 at Humanities and Education Science School, University of La Plata. Graciela is a high school teacher at pre-university level 2, and she has written and coordinated work as well as talked in different instances and environments about English and decoloniality. And last but not least, she's an activist in the group Primera DECOLONIAL. So, having done the proper introduction, I now give the floor to Graciela to start the talk.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for this nice presentation. Okay, first and foremost, I would like to say it is a big pleasure for me to take part in this cycle of talks. I would like to thank the Embassy of the United States of North America and the Faculty of Humanidades y Ciencias de la Educación for hosting this talk. I would like to say that I celebrate this whole series of talks in the frame and spirit of bilateral contribution between our cultures, that I have no doubt we have to learn from each other, especially as peoples, particularly in terms of the systemic structural complexity we are living by, which no longer is an epoch of changes, but, quoting Walter Mignolo, a change of epoch. Now, let me see if I can share my screen here. There. Okay. So I am a teacher and I couldn't help somehow tasking this opening. So I would like to invite, first of all, to borrow Vanessa Andreotti's experience that some of you probably know, and ask you to please close your eyes just for a couple of seconds and imagine a pile of beautiful, ripe, ready to be harvested and eaten corn cobs, choclos, soft, bright, and tasty. Now, open your eyes. Are these the corn cobs you had in mind? Because these were the corn cobs I was referring to. Were your corn cobs similar to these, the same as these? Okay, and this audience responds that this image is fake, that it has been photoshopped, they are completely skeptical, cannot even think of the possibility of these non-yellow corn cobs existing. So this is the exercise that she sensitized her audience to ethnocentrism and hegemony, to how our minds, our perception of reality, assumes itself as universal, as yellow. And this is problematic. Now, this also connects to the images we have chosen to illustrate the flyers. Both images belong to Ecuadorian wonderful artist and activist, Angie Vanesita, due credits to her. One image is the Pachamama embodied in a non-white woman containing in her womb all landscapes, all species, the variety and diversity of natural world. And the second image is a combination of corn cobs, of multicolored corn cobs, also a symbol of diversity, of the realness and genuineness of all expressions and manifestations of peoples and cultures beyond any form of essentialism and reductionism. That is why we have chosen the artivist and her work as a counter-hegemonic voice and form of visual production. Now, since we are here to talk about education, I would like to present my talk as a conversation. Not that I talk to people, but with people, right? And that changes everything. Conversations, I think, are the master key to the kind of opening the world is probably most in need of. Conversation, conversar, etymologically derives from Latin conversari, con, live with, live in society, and versari, go around and turn around. This first, in the sense of people frequenting each other, turning to each other, to share not a talk, but a table, a meeting. Later, after ceremonies, that is word or talk established between two or more people, ended up retaining a rhetorical, literary, and liturgical meaning, conversari took the current sense of conversation. So Romance languages resorted to conversation in the sense of gathering together to go around topics, themes, colloquially, informally. And of course, topics and themes matter. But what actually here matters the most is the gathering together. Because if you do it on your own, that is completely possible, valid, and legitimate, it will probably be half as valuable, eye-opening, enriching, and very doubtfully a vector of change. Conversation is this dynamic flow, this floor-passing, floor-getting exchange that enhances understanding in pluriversality, indifference, disagreement, conflict, and tension. Rita Segato says, la mejor forma de pensar es conversando. The best way of thinking is in conversation. So my proposal is not about homogenizing differences or coming to absolute agreements or preaching, but learning to live in and with difference without erasure, denial, or discredit of the other. So to start up this conversation about decolonizing the English curriculum in Argentina, I need to establish some decolonial common ground. I take up Quijano and Miñolo's main thesis that modernity and coloniality are the two sides of the same coin. Coloniality is side effects or deviance or an unwanted derivation of modernity. They are co-constitutive phenomena. So there is no modernity without coloniality since 1492 to these days. And also that the inaugural category of this modernity is race, the category of race. That is the classification of the population to dominate and exploit them based on epistemic and ontological criteria. Those whose knowledge languages were irrational, unintelligible, inferior, were therefore inferior beings. Cogitor ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. You don't think, so you do not exist. Now, back to the idea of conversation. The question is who speaks, who can speak? This will resonate with Spivak, probably. There is something in and about conversations, especially, and this is relevant to us in institutional environments and in the context of modernity coloniality, that cannot be understated. That we care about the contents, the what we speak about, but we cannot lose track of the terms. That is, the conditions under which conversation takes place. On many occasions, we focus on the contents and joyfully pride ourselves on the current political agenda, but pay little or no attention to the terms. How did we get to such an agenda? Who has defined the topics under discussion? What realities does this agenda address? Which social representations prevail? Is there anyone who does not actually speak but is spoken by? Are we all allowed in the dialogue of thoughts? Can we all think and speak? Bauman refers to Western hegemony and the modern intellect having the power to define and make definitions stick. So, it is not only about defining the content, but managing the terms in ways that normalize, universalize, globalize, and eventually relocalize phenomena. As Toni Morrison has said, definitions belong to the definers, not to the defined. Defining and making definitions stick in people's minds and imaginaries as single stories, linear trajectories in Arabism is the job of modern Western ethnocentrism. Now, resuming into the title of this talk, all these questions and reflections also apply to the curriculum at all levels. Briefly, following Jimeno Sacristan, my translation, the curriculum is an invention aimed at regulating the contents and the practices involved in the teaching and learning processes. Also, the curriculum is the cultural content that educational institutions aim to pass to those who frequent them, along with the effects that that content produces in its recipients. The school without cultural contents is a fiction, an empty and real and uncommitted proposal. The curriculum is the expression and substantiation of the cultural plan that the institution realizes within certain conditions. The cultural content is the logical condition of teaching, and the curriculum is the structuring of that culture in psychopedagogical words. So the curriculum is both the contents and the terms. The curriculum is the structuring and the structure. So in curriculum theory and in the social sciences that pertain now to us particularly, the big question is probably who manages the terms. And I thought it would be interesting to think and host the possibility of decolonizing the English curriculum along with the permanent dual focus on modernity coloniality and on who manages the terms, whose terms we are thinking and acting by. This will also unveil the complicities that we keep when we blindly comply with modern colonial hegemonic terms, whether because we don't see them, because they are naturalized, because we don't want to look at them, or because we agree with them. So, after somehow setting the context, I guess we can start by exploring the steps that have brought us here, where we are teaching English at schools, primary schools, high schools, universities, having profesorados or its courses of studies devoted to teacher formation to getting us in good shape to teach English. In this analytical retrospect, I would like to resort to the so-called sui generis decolonial method. Sorry, back there. By Walter Mignolo and Rolando Vázquez. A method which would not be the scientific, rigorous method that we are used to, we have in mind, but an orienting path to systematically surface hidden, not visible, not tangible phenomena. Why not visible and or tangible? Because that is the trick. Showing, telling half the story. Half flipped coin always land on the same side, the side of modernity, not of coloniality. So our aim runs counter to this invisibilizing rhetoric and trend. We wish for decolonial education in English to start problematizing the known, the established, and the instituted as valid, true, universal, that is to say, the colonial. Let's see how we can apply somehow this method onto modern concepts, ideas, beliefs, modern categories. To help us realize what we are teaching, what we are putting our English classes to the service of, what contents we are teaching, and under which and whose conditions we are managing our curriculum. We need to unlearn to relearn how to learn. But first, before anything else, we need to look hegemony in the eye. Inspect our curriculum in its many dimensions. The discourses about and around English, explicit and inexplicit, in our classrooms, our practices, the pedagogic principles underpinning them, the books that we use to teach, the contents that we tackle, and how we introduce them and treat them, and the approaches that we take up, among other things. So, to test somehow this method by choosing a modern category, we proceed by showing the genealogy in Western modernity, which allows us to transform the universal pretense of validity of Western concepts and turn them into historically situated concepts. 2, showing its coloniality, that is, the way in which they have worked to erase, silence, denigrate other forms of understanding and relating to the world. And 3, building upon this terrain, the decolonial option as a non-normative space open to the pluriversality of alternatives. In a nutshell, revealing modernity, revealing coloniality, building pluriversality, not taking anything for granted, but walking the talk. Now, to better understand what we mean by decolonizing, we should underscore that these 3 phases accurately show the flows by Mignolo, 2019, in The Coloniality of Power, by Quijano, 92-2000. From the constitution of Western modernity and its hegemonic coalescence with universal history, simultaneously destitutive of all beforeness, of all difference, non-European, not white, not male, not heteronormative, to the reconstitution of an option that is an alternative epistemology to modern alternative epistemologies. For Quijano, the constitution of modernity means the configuration of a special and specific pattern of power, he in short called coloniality of power, which controls the modern domains of existence, of modern existence, epistemic, ontological, authority, and economy. The regulatory center of power is held by particular modern agents, epistemology, institutions, and modern languages. So in figure 1 here, we see Mignolo's graphic representation of the colonial pattern or matrix of power, where we can see the 4 domains that somehow depend on an enunciation whose agents, institutions, and languages enunciate the enunciated levels. This is a kind of semiotic perspective that Mignolo adds to the ideational, to the construct by Aníbal Quijano. The 4 domains are knowledge that is to be comprehended, knowledge that is to be appropriated, right? Humanity, that is an anthropocentric worldview, forms of government that specifically relate to democracies, modern democracies, and economy, seen as living capitalism, seen as living to work. Now, the second slide, destitution, yes, shows the double movement of, right? Because this is a simultaneous movement. As modernity gets constituted, it destitutes all beforeness, all difference, as we have said. So here we can see how the buen vivir or vivir bien or conditions of existence other are displaced and sent to the discredited, disposable category of a non-credible, mythical, non-scientific, nonsensical alternative. Buen vivir or vivir bien was mejor, living better. And this involves the rhetoric of progress, development, modernization, innovation. Not barbarism, not savagery, but civilization. A dichotomy that we know will hold a decisive role also in Argentinian history. So figures 1 and 2 bear the same center of power because they represent a double simultaneous movement. What is destituted is nature, what is not human, infrahumans, but by sex and race. What is non-rigorous knowledge, other forms of government, and other forms of economies that are introductive economies in the view of the modern mind. Now, figure 3 shows the reconstitution process that is not a return to the past, but a reinscription of the past in the present. The possibility and opportunity to value, ponder on, learn from, teach, saberes, knowledges, ways of being, living, feeling, sensing, relating, that were made absent, that were disappeared and destituted. So the center in figure 3 changes into a non-center or centerless construction, a border space, which features nociology instead of epistemology, and border thinking and sensing. So here we can see what is somehow juxtaposed in the image, and the domains that are reconstituted: human life in general, and nature, communal wisdom, that is knowing to live and not living to know, harmony, equilibrium, balance, and plenitude have to do with the concept, the view of the buen vivir, and communal economy, that is working to live and not living to work. Now, this other process, that is the process of restitution, depends on the process of reconstitution that should take place before restitution, that is actual reincorporation into what the Sousa Santo has called an ecology of knowledges, of temporalities, of recognition, of transcales, of productivities. And in this grid, we can see how Mignolo explains and clarifies the processes, how modernity gets constituted by way of domination, coloniality is destitutes by way of exploitation, and how decoloniality through conflict because of domination and exploitation produces or proposes reconstitution. Now, myself, on a regular basis, when I teach this idea that modernity and coloniality are co-constitutive, when I teach that race is the inaugural category of this modernity, I can see the sense thinking happening in the classroom. And along with the discomfort that it produces, there is also the emergence of a kind of breather that conjures up feelings, sensations, and words of hope, resistance, and re-existence. So that road can reach out to heal the colonial wounds, and this is also the colonial concept, open ever since colonial epistemes and scholastic and literacy trends feeding on them and languages formatted and imaginary into the existence of difference as inequality. That is to say, as a hierarchy of superiority and inferiority. The superiority of those superior beings from superior regions who spoke superior languages and who bore and produced superior knowledges. Now, I'm going to quote extensively Walter Mignolo here because I think this is very relevant and pertinent to us. Modern colonial racism, that is, the logic of racialization that emerged in the 16th century, has two dimensions, ontological and epistemic, and one single purpose: to rank as inferior all languages beyond Greek and Latin and the 6 modern languages, European languages, and to maintain the enunciative privilege of the Renaissance and Enlightenment European institutions, men, and categories of thought. Languages that were not apt for rational thinking, either theological or secular, were considered languages that revealed the inferiority of the human beings speaking them. What could a person that was not born speaking one of the privileged languages and who was not educated in privileged institutions do? Either he or she accepts his or her inferiority or makes an effort to demonstrate that he or she is a human being equal to those who placed him or her as second class. That is, to accept the humiliation of being inferior to those who decided that you are inferior, or to assimilate. And to assimilate means that you accept your inferiority and resign to playing the game that is not yours, but that has been imposed on you. Or the third option is border thinking. Border thinking would heal the colonial wound, which Kush and other Latin American thinkers such as Salazar-Bondi thought of as a lack of philosophical categories to think ourselves. This categoryless category that produces the impossibility of a genuine Latin American philosophy and thoughts, an imaginary that is not only stigmatized, deemed wild, barbaric, uneducated, and civilized, but it has been taken over by European categories. And it is unpronounceable, ineffable, it cannot be said. This partly explains what Kush states as el miedo a ser nosotros mismos y pensar lo propio, the fear to be ourselves and think of our own being. Who are we? The America Edienta, the stinking America, or the America Pulcra, the neat and clean America? Mind you that cleanliness and neatness are modern European categories, not universal, but historically situated as well. So since 1492, we have been in trouble with language. And we need to historicize this to eventually deal with the idea of the place of English among us in our system. We have to deal with colonialism, coloniality, and with how institutions, by taking up Europeanizing, internationalizing discourses, have contributed to forge loose and grounded identities. So, briefly, surfing history back to the conquest, we can track and trace the role of the Spanish and Portuguese empires and languages, companions by necessity, in their civilizing messianic mission in Nabia Shala. Modern languages have assumed such superiority as an inherent condition and deployed an active role in domination, usurpation, and erasure. Appropriation and colonization through proper names, proper nouns, is but an example clearly portrayed in the denaming and renaming of Abya Yala into America. Modern languages, Spanish, Portuguese, French, English, German, and Italian, have acted to the service of imperialism, colonialism, continental, overseas, transatlantic, global, you name it. We should be able to see the destitution, the modern colonial disruption by Latin and Spanish languages first, by missionaries, their schooling system in the reductions, the reducciones, and the Castilian and Catholic imperatives for acculturation and evangelization. This passed on to our national history and crafted an independence that reproduced that imaginary and even reinforced it. Now, in the 19th century, the Argentinian national project, in the hands of the generation of the 80s, was strongly monocultural and monolingual, with a weighty emphasis laid on the elimination of otherness and wilderness, gauchos and the indigenous peoples, their languages and cultures. However, the construction of nationality as a category needed the school machinery as the most relevant instrument to indoctrinate the population into, and I quote Bertoni, 1992, habit formation, content, and value transmission, also being a privileged environment for the creation of patriotic emotional endorsement. Therefore, the correlation of the national project in education is Sarmiento's will and decision to achieve the unification of the population through a nationalist aim, which would also simultaneously Europeanize the natives and Spanishize or Castilianize, that is homogenize, the huge European immigration flow and their various languages and dialects. Now, to this purpose, the Common Educational Law 1420 from 1884, which is passed during Roca's presidency, to which we owe obligatory public free and lay education, education for all, education as a right. However, the discourse of civilization and barbarism and homogenization is constitutive of this new school and contemporary to the Desert Campaign, which substantiates the genocide of whole indigenous populations, Pampas, Tehuelches, Mapuches, Ranqueles. So reliance upon dominant culture, that is Europe and the United States, goes well into the 20th century. Now we have to narrow this a bit into foreign languages. Following Baum, he states that in the late 19th century, both the teaching of French and English, particularly French, most prominently French, held a relevant fraction of the curriculum. More than half of the curriculum was devoted to the teaching of French and English. In spite of their very low quality, and this is Juan Ramón Fernández report 1903. The author also highlights that from the 20th century to the 1990s, there were numerous bicultural deals and a growing presence of English in mass media. So we can see the classic gravitation of French and English languages among Now, during the last dictatorship, the preferred foreign language was English due to the political collaboration between Argentina and the United States. With the advent of democracy, the decision was to formally teach a single foreign language among English, French, or Italian, though English resulted by far the most widely taught. The massive entry of the English language into the public school curriculum took place as from 1993 with the passing of the Federal Law of Education. First, in the 60s, its teaching had been slightly introduced, but was still restricted to primary education since secondary education was not compulsory. Later on, in 1993, it was obligatory included in the curriculum. Then the Federal Law of Education failed, different reasons, and in 2003, we had the National Law of Education passed, which was regulated in 2006, amplifying the scope of English teaching to primary and secondary education. And in 2007, this was further expanded from fourth form onwards, both in private and public systems. All measures, as we see, meant the scalability, and I'm aware of the business jargon, at the expense of other non-native languages in the curriculum, especially debunking 19th century French prevalence and its early 20th century efforts. So, having almost entirely displaced French, English became the foreign language formally taught in our country, which needs to be understood against the bigger picture of modernist coloniality and the increasing gravitation of North American power and cultural industry. Now, current globalization, we can tell, concurs with coloniality. That is to say, the impossibility of the post-colonial, the impossibility of the outsideness of capitalism. This global world order has produced a kind of super language, the language of languages. There would also be a kind of linguistic panopticon for surveillance and control, supposedly able to signify hyper-heterogeneous subjectivities. We see that English has undeniably overthrown all other modern colonial languages to eventually become the global international language, euphemism for less politically correct formula. Under these conditions, we argue that the teaching and learning of the English language to non-English speaking people has come to embody and enact a symbolic capital that articulates with colonial complicities. Let's see. Globally, English is the language of power because it rules meaning making. It governs scientific knowledge production in terms of its communication. It defines central and or peripheral participation in business and finance, in scientific communities of practice, and they are legitimizing canon and standard. Therefore, English is the language of money. They say that money talks, and well, money talks English. Michael Stewart has smartly said, anyone who teaches English outside of England is part of the colonial project, particularly if the teaching takes place within a sanctioned institution, and if the English being taught is a standardized official English. One need only contemplate the role of language and schooling in European colonization of the Americas, Africa, Australia, and Asia to grasp the central function of teaching, particularly teaching English in colonization. We need to acknowledge that our role as teachers of English is problematic in terms of meritocracy and exclusion, that by teaching English, we're inherently complicit with forces that might damage marginalized students. Now we can see ourselves as generous and helpful. Go back. Yes, as generous and helpful with the helpless victims, and avoid being targeted for foregrounding the fact that the pain of marginalized groups is inherent to and necessary to the functioning of the system. However, instead of holding a paternalistic position, politically conscious teachers struggle with the problematic nature of our role. See the inequitable system as needing change, not the individual. Do not fall into the bootstrap myth that says that by helping individuals, you are effecting social change. And this goes beyond academic success that has to do with shifting power toward the groups to which marginalized students belong. And that will bring about individual change eventually, not the other way around. English is the first non-native language officially taught in formal compulsory education in Argentina, and by and large, the most chosen at university courses, choices that reproduce the self-other logic, that is the aspiration to be the self, the same, and to use this corncob metaphor, the fabricated desire to be a yellow corncob at all costs, which is based on subordinate inclusion. English is locally required in its highest proficiency levels for most qualified vacancies and positions, academic and or professionals, at obliterated costs. And this is part of the charity role we teachers seem to occupy. However, as James Tollefson has wisely stated, language education professionals must reject the notion that learning a language is an ideologically neutral act intended simply to develop an employment skill. That some people must learn English to get a job is a result of unequal relationships of power, not a solution to them. Visibilizing and dismantling the coloniality of the English curriculum that reproduces and spreads European bandwagonism in approaches in curriculum and teacher education, etc., and the taken for granted depoliticized surplus value inherent in English is an artist's task, which we can carry out within and outside the classroom using all available material and symbolic spaces to unenslave, and I quote Malcolm X, the enslaved minds. This is no mild challenge, since our students' minds are permanently domesticated in English, be it by mass media, social networks, supranational institutions, organisms, and organizations of prestige. Also, whenever we get caught and buy into the cleansed discourse of intercultural mediation or interculturality, both relational and functional. So in and from the South, we sustain a situated locus of enunciation, and we acknowledge the need of a South-based English curriculum. Otherwise, we will end up all wearing identical lenses to see reality. And we know that what is real cannot be reduced to what exists, because what exists is the surgical result of the algorithm crafted by the epistemologies of the North. All the produced absences that are very real, but have ceased to exist for the modern globalized monocultural world. English is in itself an epistemic monoculture linked to epistemic intellectual fascism, and is also the language of the enunciation of the category system of modern life and its respective domains in monocultures, that is, the categories that we consume and where English is an asset. This idea that I once heard from Fernando Guanacuni Mamani, nortearnos, estar norteados, that is not only heading north, but being northed, also helps us explain the historical continuous permeating presence of English in the Argentinian private and public schooling systems since the 20th century onwards. Now, to reconstitute and embrace the pluriversal, following Kush, it is necessary to first ground ourselves, root ourselves, arraigarnos, in our Latin American suelo, land, find our cultural subjects, reestablish the dialogue with our history, stories, and ancestry. Only then will we be able to sustain the I am where I think in sense, pronounced by Walter Mignolo. Now, we come to wonder whether and how we can instantiate a decolonial curriculum of English that enables students to develop and keep their philosophical categories. That is to say, enunciate themselves, name and communicate their wills, their otherness to the self, and participates in the dialogue of thoughts, definition of content and terms. How can we trust that decolonial pedagogies will help us resist the effects of hegemonic single-story power that uproots any kind of belonging except the global one, synonymous with the market? Marketingized existences become objectified, helplessly trying to survive inclusion by way of oppression, subalternization, and suppression. Teaching English in Argentina from the messianic discourse of access, success, and achievement, invisibilizing the colonial counter-benefit involved, reinforces the conception of language as an apolitical, neutral instrument that naively channels messages. However, as McLuhan has claimed, the medium is the message. We cannot neglect the overarching power of language, in this case, beyond the content being addressed. We reject the idea of language as means to an end, and acknowledge that McLuhan's statements counters that very idea by placing the focus on the medium that is politicized, imbued with ideologies, on language as power, control, and performativity. But the trap is always around the corner, not realizing that the rhetoric of modernity that is promising control over the contents hides the logic of coloniality that is denying control over the terms. Managing the contents, what is said, distracts the attention from the conditions of the enunciation. Who defines the rules of the negotiation of meanings? Who is entitled to say what is knowledge? What knowledge is eligible to be said? Who it is said to? Yes, the medium is the message, but not all mediums are equal. Not all mediums exercise and build power in the same ways. English is a suitable example to prove so, but it will locally resonate with an aspirationally bred desire to become the self, to increasingly resemble a subject that proceeds by othering the other. Such machinery feeds on the Western, white, Anglo-centered colonial capitalist system that crushes pluriversality and bio-ecocentric views. Instead, it works by extraction. Extractivism is material, but it's also affective, cognitive, linguistic, and cultural. So, decolonizing the English curriculum sides with a reconstitutive practice that returns life, vitality, and worth to the spaces from which they were destituted before the constitution of the colonial matrix of power. A colonial language that we can use to visibilize this coloniality and denounce and contest its normalized and normalizing effects. That we should see, on the one hand, that what is presented as natural and normalized, that is, English is the global international language, is not natural, but follows a determinist fallacy. And on the other hand, that we should be on the alert not to jump into the normalizing ego-epistemic market trail that preaches English favors equality by providing common ground, only on account of an overwhelming majority opting for the same. Let's be clear about this. The same is strongly committed to the production and reproduction of its sameness, which in fact lies in the hands of an overwhelming minority. So decolonizing the English curriculum dismisses hierarchies of knowledge, which in turn depend on or are functional to hierarchies of power. Languages are the loom, the knitting needles for the social fabric we aim to produce, and English is but one of them. Needless to say, there is conflict and tension arising from this non-monolithic pluritopic positioning, but we welcome them into the conversation and encourage the emergence of a platform to contest the canon and the silencing of the other. The conception of global English permeating the curriculum as geopolitical and geoepistemic center reveals the most insidious problematic, the control of meanings. A South-based curriculum of English that neglects, ignores, or obscures its hidden and null agenda to the benefit of its washed, official, and taught agenda will submit to being enunciated, to having its meanings controlled, to being the puppet moved by the puppeteer's strings. Our questions and queries are manifold. Why teach English at all? What to teach? Shall we cage the language in a grammar and sell a boxed instrument in the shape of course books that satisfies, suits in a one-size-fits-all logic the global market? Are we, by doing so, taking up an internationalizing stance that turns us into what FaHCE has called the sepoys of coloniality? Can we obediently reduce the teaching of the language of hegemonic meaning production to a quieting set of rules to be graded according to psycholinguistic criteria and taught in tandem, regardless of place, politics, and identity? What is the maneuver behind? Haven't we witnessed enough evidence that language is power and that modern languages have behaved in epistemically widening ways? This is probably our only answer amidst a large set of questions. Linguicide leads to epistemicide. By letting the coloniality of English curriculum go inadvertently, we are underestimating its distributive agency. Hegemonic power, the center of the pattern of power, colonizes and controls meanings in a process that is parallel, according to Mignolo, is parallel to the control of money. And that responds to the greed for domestication and subordination into English and preclusion of people's linguistic rights. However, languages are living beings. They breathe, grow, change, and strive. They have and are memories. But the coloniality of power chokes them to death, not before thieving their richness to its own content. English has played such a role. In the words of James Nichol, English does not borrow from other languages. English follows other languages down dark alleys, knocks them over, and goes through their pockets for loose grammar. Therefore, mine is again a question arsenal. Who do we teach English to in our South? What contents do we teach, and in what and whose terms? Can we address our land, suelo, and existential address, domicilio existencial, in an alien language? Can we find grounding, arraigo, in its sounds, rhythms, pace, words? My provisional, humble answer is yes. Building a locus of enunciation in teacher education predominantly, in curriculum and in teaching material design, that laces language teaching to the South in terms of ad hoc categories that also and most relevantly pertain to us. We are the English teachers, we are the odd one out, and we have to end the myth. So using these instruments and categories for problematizing the intersectionality of race, patriarchy, and coloniality as systems of oppression, as colonial capitalist projects over our bodies in the South as teachers and students of English. Struggling for general democratized access to initiation, permanence, and termination in the educational system, particularly for massive public and free access to English. Mind you, public and free do not imply not meritocratic. Passivity that is regulated but not applied homogeneously along the country because we lack the state-level instances that guarantee this. And of course, inclusion with equality and with quality, not at its expense, and with equity. Equality, someone said, equality is giving everyone the same pair of shoes. Equity is giving everyone a pair of shoes that fits. So, having the subaltern speak the language of hegemony, the language of the victimizer, how can an English curriculum not address and historicize who we are and instead reproduce a make-believe that whitens us and our lineage because of our European descent, skipping our ancestral descent? Is it about an anti-English radicalized position, banning English from our formal education? Is it about another fundamentalism that will seek to reproduce the steps of the linguicide perpetrated by hegemonic views? Well, no. It is not about holding a sidal position, but becoming and being aware and spreading awareness of the complicities and the ways to break away from them. As educators in an imperial colonial language, we must teach to see the trick. We should use the classroom to show the modernity of stories around us that are not universal, that are historically situated, and the coloniality behind. This would surely offer students an amplified perspective into how necessary knowing and using the language of the oppressor is to contest their colonial designs, though not through their same discourses and instruments, and to translate who we are. Weaponizing the English language as a collectively empowering instrument is also the path to the link, constantly underscoring the weight of epistemic disobedience. Using the academia for decolonial projects about and around English, and not decoloniality for academic ones, since institutions will, by their own nature, promote verticalism, status quo, reproduction, merit, and tend to accommodate decoloniality within their power structures, disciplinary constitution, and accreditation systems. Instead, using them to the service of, in our own areas or fields, to the service of decoloniality, which means detecting the gaps for, in micro doses, challenge the counter. The linking implies going somewhere else. The linking from the logic of coloniality and the rhetoric of modernity implies going somewhere else. And as regards the English curriculum, this other place becomes a place other, away from English as an international, global, additional, foreign, interlanguage, target language, lingua franca, world English, and world Englishes alike. It is heading for English as a language other to decolonize the English curriculum in and from the South. Now, inscribed in the genealogy of positions other and not other positions from Katibi, Panciottre, Arteagas, and other tongue, and Mignolos, and other paradigm, we name English as a language other to contribute to the emergence of a delinked space where English is no longer the language of knowledge, of power, and privilege. We seek to uncouple the idea of opportunity and the right to desire from the idea of race, to achieve equality in difference. Conceiving of naming as a political act, the language other denomination produces a syntactic break, an anti-normative phrase, which causes estrangement and discomfort. This transitorily suspends our common sense to seek for answers in other senses, because it is disruptive. It denies itself as a disjunctive alternative in alternation or in exclusion. It is an alternative denomination to hegemonic alternative denominations. For this to happen, we need to build categories, enunciative agency, and belonging. Such a border position entails looking for an alternative way to think of and imagine alternatives. Teaching English as a language other involves doing it in the mood that we're permanently about to fall into the modern trap, but also in the belief that from decolonial pedagogies of resistance and re-existence, we can accompany processes of awakening and unlearning. These processes need to be inscribed in border spaces, where English is turned into visualization of the abyssal line, so that its colonial side, inhabited by the colonial difference, is no longer an absence, where the colonial wound is not a long overcome past in universal history that is a sanctioned ignorance, but the very reality of those who suffer racialization on a daily basis. Sanctioned ignorance, the validated omitter so frequent in academic elites, leads to reproduction and foreclosure of colonial structures and domination. Following Beverly Tatum, racism is a system of advantage based on race, and we can tell whose the advantages are. And English is their language, but we can teach it, intervening the production, circulation, and permanence of meanings, especially in modern institutions. Also, by revisiting institutional genres, curricula, study programs that weave together the political, the rhetorical, the subjective, the embodied, the social, the epistemic, and the axiological. At that crossroad, further questions will queue up. What and whose knowledge is taught? Why is it taught? Who receives it? And backgrounding it all, in what language? Because as we have said, the medium is the message, and English is certainly both. Now, as regards institutional genres, we have run research into 7 subjects and 16 programs in our. We have analyzed 7 dimensions and have found that English is the academic lingua franca. The bibliography is almost exclusively in English by English-speaking authors. The view of language is pragmatic and utilitarian. There is a proficiency-led native speakerist trend as regards objectives and methodology. Also, there is an evaluative bias and a procedural focus in didactic tendencies. Also, and most prominently, the alarming quasi-absence of political pedagogical contents and or approaches. We have also analyzed the rationale for the curricular documents in the Portal ABC, that is the platform and repository for all such documents in the province of Buenos Aires. I'm only briefly referring here to the Ciclo Superior Orientado that covers the last 3 years of secondary or high school education. This rationale says the presence of English as a foreign language in this level aims at developing critical thinking in students so that they can adopt a broad view of the world by means of a reflection on the codes of the English language. And of course, language is not a code. A code yields disambiguated messages and is invariant in its meanings, does not carry different weights in different contexts, does not embody personal styles, and is not subject to personal meanings. Language is vital and multidimensional. So this conception of language as code does not match the aim of developing critical thinking. And it continues. The formation of a high school leaver who knows and respects the spirit of other cultures and diversity without risking their identity. Faced with the need to insert themselves in an increasingly globalized world. Now, critical thinking, we argue, should go straight to problematizing this fact, that you are to forcefully fit the machinery instead of assuming it as given. Globalization will produce monocultures, not recognition of diversity or protection of local identities at risk. And it continues. The use of the English language in contexts that allow students to appropriate meanings and develop communicative competence to respond with flexibility to the reality they will have to deal with. Now, English apparently prepares them to flexibly submit to a reality, to modern demands, so that they are trained and competent, oppressed people. The English language, it says, has become a predominant language out of the cultural, economic, and political changes that have taken place. So this predominant subordinate status is naturalized, is normalized, and therefore it will go unquestioned. Then it goes on to say that it is no longer the language of last century colonizers. This is again a sanctioned ignorance, which is based on denial of the relevance of the past in the present. It dismisses colonialism, it encourages depoliticization and ahistoricism by setting a whitewashed agenda. But it says it is the linguistic and communicative tool used in the current processes of economic, technological, scientific, and cultural expansion. Again, the concept of English as a tool, as a means to something else. And English is seen here as a tool, evidently, of upward mobility, social and or professional. Now, it continues to say that teenage students are exposed to English in most daily life activities. This is not problematized but acknowledged. And as an example, they mention communication and new technologies, right? And they say that this is relevant because students will succeed in putting English into practice in real contexts. Now, the conception of English as mediational between students and technology and applicationist as regards the univocal use it is put to seems to leave out the ideological sphere by losing track of how much the language uses us and how much, being the tech marketplace language, it becomes a commodity, overpriced as a good of consumption and elitist. And all this is said in the context of free public education in Buenos Aires province. The objectives it states are insert themselves in the global labor world, awaiting them when they finish the current academic level. Now, the fact that there is an accessible global world and that English is an asset is not challenged but acknowledged. Then it goes, obtain updated information from its original source. So the language of original sources is English, or updated information is in English, or information worth accessing is in English. Anyway, positive sides with English. Strengthen their own identity and develop comprehension of other cultures. Now I wonder how, if English is the language that solves all problems, opens all doors, or gives all the answers in the global world, why would students care about their language and identity? Develop critical thinking. Will they? By blindly, quietly accepting the prevalence and predominance of English. Again, placing this depoliticized surplus value in English, needing to have the command of English for all you do or aspire to do, and how this has filled out our imaginary is the problem, not the solution to get you anywhere. The solution is not English, the problem is. However, we can change the rules of the game. That is the contents. That is not the contents, but the terms. How? Probably designing materials that tackle decolonial content and readdress the terms of treatment. Teaching to learning outcomes and awareness that address power and social injustice. Design assessments that allow diverse students to demonstrate mastery in diverse ways. Involve students in the creation of curriculum. Embrace diverse language usage in interactions, writings, and tests. Involve oneself at the institutional, local, and or national levels to advocate for equity. Yet, the first change must be to become politically conscious. In order to speak truth to power, one must first enable oneself to see the trap of modernity, coloniality. Now, we can avoid teaching by the canon, and we can avoid teaching for the canon. But first, we need to look the canon in the eye. Second, we need to rummage into its pockets. And third, we need to name our findings in our own languages so that the curricular landscape shelters the pluriversality of the world and the universal canon return. Now, I would like to present part of a didactic unit of teaching material that is in a digital book published this year, libro de cátedra, called Enseñar Inglés, Complicidad Colonial, la opción de colonial como contrapedagogía para ver, visibilizar y resistir la trampa moderna, Teaching English, Cultural Complicity, the decolonial option as a counter-pedagogy to see, visibilize, and resist the modern trap. The book, let's see if it opens, it's there. There, okay. So it's available. And into the book, we have, as from chapter 3.
Sorry, Grace,
as from
we are
chapter
not
3.
seeing the book. We are seeing
it's not.
PowerPoint.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Have to choose.
Right. I thought you were. So let's see if I can. I don't know if I can show you the book, but I can show you the. I can share the. Let's see if I can share this. No, it's okay. Sharing.
Yes. Perfect.
Yes. Okay. So that was the book that is available anyway. But this is part of a sequence that is teaching poverty in Latin America, of a didactic unit. And this is the introduction in the chapter. This chapter revisits the concept of poverty from an ethno-historic perspective, since each of the geographical spaces chosen to approach the thematic axis is a Latin American enclave of poverty. From the comprehension, reflection, and commitment with the dispossessed, the proposal is to insert the walls that separate and create inequality materially and symbolically, and to intervene in empowering otherness. So then, what we have is part of the material that was the didactic unit of the material that was used, that is published in this book. Yeah, and this is somehow we can see how certain concepts here that refer to power and hegemony are historicized and treated to try to open up simply to second-year high school students with a low command of the language questions related to poverty in the South. The linguistic content and aims are achievable, are simple, the genre focus is also simple but interpolating, and the whole educational purpose is to raise awareness, increase comprehension, and keep students thinking about poverty in our region. So it is about socializing the content that we consider relevant, but also grabbing the terms by building a locus of enunciation and a sense of ground, of belonging, and of the possibility and need to transform reality. So this didactic unit is about 4 women, an artist, a sociologist, an archaeologist, and a geologist, 4 professional women that get in touch with the MST, el movimiento de los trabajadores sin tierra, Brazil, World Workers Without Land, and set off on a trip to research poverty in Latin America. So they go to Colombia, Brazil, Puerto Rico, and Argentina, and see how the walls that they find there signify exclusion and separation between poor people and others. And race is in the spotlight here again. So the narrative that threads the material together also bridges cultural distance with students, right? So in this material, we see how these 4 women go on this trip and they take different photographs that they share, and students have to caption the photographs. So then there is some time devoted to the conception of the wall, what the wall signifies in the different places where these women go, and what the wall generates in terms of feelings and emotions. Other walls are revisited, walls between Tijuana, Mexico, and San Diego, Viejo San Juan en La Perla, Villa 31 en Autopista Ilía in Buenos Aires. So, the didactic unit continues showing how the different walls generate exclusion, how these break children's rights. They work with a song by Mercedes Sosa in Calle 13, Hay un niño en la calle. Then they get to Brazil, then continue captioning, move to Buenos Aires. They work with Bernie, pictures paintings where we see the effects of industrialization and poverty in Buenos Aires. And Juanito Laguna, that is the boy, the symbol of children's rights abuse in Latin America. So what we can see here, what I want to show is that all these things that we've been talking about are doable, that we can turn them into actual classroom experiences, that we can definitely subvert and insert the canon and the English curriculum in teacher education and other instances. I mean, continuous teacher education and initial teacher education, coming up with this kind of situated pedagogies. That's all here. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Yeah. Great presentation. Really great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Graciela.
Yeah, and thank Sofía, Daniela, Ana, Tomás, Mariana, Irina, Eliana, Andres, Fiorella, Laura, Eliana again, Facu, Florencia, Rochi, Sofía, Florencia. On YouTube, but maybe Vero can ask something first.
Okay, if you have questions there.
Yes, Graciela, the first question we have here, Sofia Rivera asks, how could we as educators start to decide the terms and start to teach language that is not ideologically neutral? By neutral, I mean when teaching with material that rarely addresses our ways of being and living.
Right. Yes, that is what usually happens when we deal with material that is, imposed by an institution, and we end up using course books from publishing houses, foreign publishing houses that we all know. So the first thing that we have to learn from this is that if we are working for an institution that demands the use of this kind of material, we should use it. But the proposal would be inserting this, looking for and finding the gaps, right, where we can use this material, but at the same time, use the material to show what the material offers as canonical, the categories that the material works with, and eventually somehow do away with these categories. That is, we have to decolonize this material using it, but at the same time, showing that there are things in the material that function as part of the categorical system that we can contest and challenge anyway. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's not stop using the material, but we are anyway getting to manage the terms, even if we somehow use the contents.
Okay, there is another question from Florencia Marino. And she says that if we shouldn't take English as a commodity and reproduce the original source, does it mean we can use Spanish sources in our curriculum?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely. We can use Spanish sources. We can use any language that allows for mutual comprehension, for intercomprehension, because all are valid, equally valid languages. So, yeah, of course. In curriculum, you include bibliography that is not in English. That is what I suggest, that it's good to include bibliography that is not only English-speaking authors.
Great. There is another question here. Why would a change in the curriculum heal the colonial wounds?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yes. Sorry, why would a change in the curriculum heal the colonial wounds?
Yeah, what I was saying is that to find a sense of belonging, arraigo, and situatedness, and building from there a locus of enunciation will go hand in hand with the production of categories of our own, philosophical categories that will somehow enable us to produce a curriculum that is situated, and that will, being able to produce our own categories of thinking, of philosophical categories, will, I guess, help heal this colonial wound. That has to do with the destitution of categories of our own.
Right. Graciela, here we have the question. Do you think we as educators need to adopt this perspective beyond the class?
Beyond the class? Yes, definitely. I mean, that is a perspective that you just adopt in the class and everywhere. I mean, it's difficult to adopt the perspective in the class and proceed otherwise outside the class. This is a way of thinking and feeling and sensing, right? So it's like sentipensante, or it's something that you think and feel at the same time, and it happens in the classroom and it will happen outside the classroom as well. I mean, naturally, it's difficult because, I mean, you won't split yourself, in the classroom and outside the classroom. So definitely, yes, in something that you bring into the classroom because you yourself believe that you should, right?
Okay,
right here, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Continue. Well, Mercedes Ley asks, what do students think about this material?
What do students think about this material? Students get engaged, definitely engaged, right? At times there is a resistance because they are used to manipulating different kinds of sources and course books. So the traditional course book, it has nothing to do with this material. This material breaks away from this, from traditional course books. And there is some resistance at times because of the topics, probably because they feel interpolated by the material, and this produces discomfort. So at the same time, it generates resistance. But then when they relax, let's say, and see how they can relate with the material and how the material bridges with their own reality, with everyday life. So that changes everything. But probably at very beginning, it's not that easy. Mm-hmm. And the format is different, and the logic of the material is different, and the tasks and the way you work with the language is different. So this whole difference at the beginning can be shocking or unexpected, or not. Then they definitely get to enjoy the material.
Okay, there is one more question from Florencia, and it says, how can we as teachers of English become disobedient inside the classroom?
Disobedience in terms of epistemic disobedience has to do exactly with this that I was saying, that is challenging the canon, right, and not taking things verbatim as they are, but challenging them, contesting them, and if there are categories that appear to be universal, to be hegemonic and homogeneous, start dismantling that in the classroom with students, and that will produce a sense of disobedience, of epistemic disobedience, not taking everything for granted because it is said, because the course book says it, because an author says it, but question constantly, contest, and challenge those categories that appear as valid, as hegemonic, as homogeneous. So that is the kind of option here.
Here we have one more question. Daniela Marini asks, how do you engage students in border thinking? How do you engage students in border thinking?
Border thinking has to do, again, with this idea of getting somewhere else to a place other, right? So you delink from the logic of coloniality and the rhetoric of modernity. And the option that emerges is this border thinking. That is, what is border thinking? Is this possibility and somehow this awareness of knowing what happens at each side of this line, that is the line dividing modernity and coloniality and modernity. This is the frontier. This is the border, right? The one that divides both. So this symbolic space you get to occupy when you are aware of both, of modernity and coloniality. So you delink from the logic of modernity, of coloniality, and the rhetoric of modernity. So when you realize that modernity is a rhetoric, and that it immediately links you, fetters you to the logic of coloniality. So the moment of the linking is, okay, I don't belong here or there. So this other place, this place other, is the border. So students will, it's also part of a choice, right? It's not something that you have students do, but it's something that eventually students will feel. So situating yourself there has to do with this linking process and not buying into the rhetoric of modernity. And of course, that delinks you from the logic of coloniality. So this space that emerges, that is the border, and it's made in the making. You make it in the making, right? So it's something that you and students will go together, that will tread together. It's a path that you tread with students. I don't know if it's clear. Some concepts are not easy to explain, right?
Okay, there is one more. It's quite long. Ezequiel Fernandez Larrañaga says, where does change should come from first? Curriculum or teacher's mind? Changing the curriculum means that we are going to to change the teacher's mind, or vice versa.
Yeah, I guess it begins with teacher education, right? I think it has to do, first of all, we have to think of teacher education. Yeah, I mean, how teachers in initial programs, initial programs at university or in permanent formation programs, what they get from there, because the change, I think, comes not only from the mind, but from the heart, right? So this idea of thinking and feeling together, how the contents and the kind of that teachers receive in their education, their training, let's say, will produce changes in the curriculum and not the other way around. I think that is the seed, right? That is the seed, and that is going to grow into a different kind of curriculum or curriculum otherwise. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, there are no more questions, unless there are some comments, though. They really appreciate your talk, and thank you. And thank you for your comments and this thought.
Okay, that's great.
We can wait some seconds to see if there's...
Yeah, if there is any other question, you can try to answer.
Here we have another one. In relation to Ezequiel's question, have you found it difficult to work with other teachers? Mercedes Lai asks.
To work with other teachers?
If you have found difficult to work with other teachers.
Yeah, probably yes. Yeah, because it's not a very, let's say, it's not the ordinary position, right? It's not the ordinary way we are taught. So this is part of our academic biography. And the way we've been taught, the way we've learned how to teach is quite different from this perspective. So the rationale behind somehow it's oriented otherwise. So it's not easy probably to find colleagues, right, that think or feel or perceive in similar ways. But I still think that this is quite, in terms of English teaching and the curriculum of English and everything, is quite new, I would say. It's not very much, it's not that popular, let's say, yeah. And so I think that it might grow into a web of teachers or new teachers that might be feeding on the perspective as well, right? New generations of teachers. So I think it's going to happen. I mean, and not because it's not the idea is not that this is another universal, that we are all teachers. I mean, in the same way, with the same perspective, under the same umbrella, but that the pluriversality also implies living with this difference in this constant conversation and learning and relearning and unlearning. So it's okay. Everything is okay. So I celebrate everything and that we can talk things over, especially.
Elena says, thank you for your insight. It has been very enlightening. Thank you, Daniela. Muy interesante, Estela. Fiorella says, thank you, Graciela. Es increíble lo que traes como persona que estudia ciencias de la educación e inglés como segunda lengua. Me llevo muchas preguntas.
Thank you. That's good. That's great. Questions rather than answers. Right?
Yeah, right.
Uh-huh.
Leonor Sara says, thanks, great.
Oh, thank you.
Merci, Leonor.
Thank you very much.
Then there is another comment from Eliana Pirelon. It says, thank you, Graciela. It was a really powerful talk, and I share your ideas completely. I might not agree that much with the material, but I should have a closer look at it.
Right. That would be great. Okay, that someone disagrees and wants to look at material more closely, and that we can even discuss things. That is really empowering. Yeah, that is great. Thank you.
That's the attitude. I mean,
of course.
In the eye, you said.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear Eliana's position and what she sees in the material that I might not be seeing.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Here we have a question in Spanish. ¿Se podrá insertar esta perspectiva decolonial respecto al inglés en el campo de la producción de conocimiento? Creo que hay una posición acerca del inglés en la cual se valora mucho más que otras lenguas.
Yes, I mean, should I answer in English? Probably. I don't know.
Yeah, I can translate it.
No, but it's difficult for me to, I don't know. Right. I'd rather answer everything in Spanish, but I know that, of course, if there are people in the audience or later might see the talk, they need an answer in English as well. Right. Transferring the perspective into knowledge. What was the question again?
In the production of knowledge. If you can adopt this perspective, the colonial perspective, related to English in the production of knowledge. I think there's a position related to English in which it is more valued than other languages.
Definitely. Yes, it is the language of knowledge. It is the language of power, / knowledge. So, yeah, I mean, that is indisputable. That English is the language of power and knowledge, we all know. Now, to change the direction of the wheel, or to change, that would be a change of paradigm. And of course, a change of paradigm would be a paradigm other. That is what would eventually propose when he speaks about a paradigm other, un paradigma otro, right? That it's not the language, in this case applied to English, wouldn't be the language of power, but that all languages have a say, and that we can, when we have to, for example, write our papers or articles for public communication, it should be in our language and in other languages and in several languages, right? And not only in English, because this has to do with the production and communication of knowledge. I don't know if that is immediately possible. I think it's something that can happen in the future. And for that to happen in the future, we have to be very much aware not to reproduce this. because what we are responsible in as much as we are constantly producing and reproducing the canon. And the canon says that you have to write in English for you to reach a broader audience, public, whatever. So I don't have an answer. I think it can happen, but it's also upon us. It's our responsibility to change, little by little, change the way things are. Yeah.
Well, connected to that question, we have another that says, if English is the imperial language, is it possible to teach English from a decolonial perspective?
Yeah, it's what I was saying. Yeah, you can teach English from a decolonial perspective, but you have to do many things. Most of the things that I was commenting on, you have to put in practice, beginning by this decolonial method, right? The 3 steps there are key, in my view, to teach English or anything, not just English. Any discipline that you teach, you can, and you use modern categories, because that is what we constantly do. It's not only English. It's history, it's English, it's literature, it's geography, it's sociology, is whatever discipline we teach. Disciplines are modern constructs, right? So the way we teach within the disciplines has to do with following the canon, and this decolonial method would proceed otherwise, by revealing and dismantling the canon to give way to an alternative, right? That in this case is called reconstitution. That you apply to, could be, I know it should, but could be applied to any science, any discipline that we teach in our institutions. Yeah, of course. Not only English, right?
There are some comments from Mercedes. There is no question, but I think they are worth reading. They're in Spanish, though. It says, muchos de los adultos de nuestro país, Argentina, hemos sido conscientes de las distintas formas de colonialismo que se han aplicado en forma consciente y también silenciosa, actuando directamente desde el inconsciente. A veces hemos podido conscientemente no seguir la norma, otras por temor a quedar fuera de algo deseado, un lugar, un reconocimiento, una economía. Hemos aceptado sin filtrar lo que se nos propuso. Adhiero a esta propuesta y a que trabajemos para que pueda visibilizarse en más áreas aún, reconociendo ampliamente el esfuerzo que implica plantearlo desde el aprendizaje de un idioma extranjero.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, definitely. It's possible to do it in all areas, in all disciplines. No, not only, but also. Yeah, thank you. Great comments.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's it. Everybody's saying thank you and amazing, and thank you for the answers, and great, and yeah. So thank you, Professor Graciela Baum, Professor Veronica March, and Professor Carolina Marino, also the author of the unit.
Yes. Yeah, one of the authors of the unit, right, of the didactic unit.
So congratulations, great presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for being there, for being here. And okay, we
see you Monday at 6
p.m. We can keep in touch. Yes, I'm there next Monday presenting Walter Mignolo, and fantastic talk. So you're all invited, more than invited, everyone. We'll be here.
Okay, perfect. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Recording stopped.